Bright Lights, our weekly podcast where we focus on achievements and achievers in all areas of human endeavor. Our goal is to bring to you their story, their size, let them shed a bright light, be a bright light for you. A lot of times, achievers have a lot of things in common. I used to say to everyone, we all face basically the same amount of obstacles and bad luck and things to us in life, but somehow achievers overcome all of those obstacles. They got a great attitude. They respond to things, and I've been saying for the last that for me, perspective, attitude, and reaction is more important than what's the world bring to you. And I think most of the achievers that we have kind of demonstrate that. So, uh, wasn't here live last week, and I hesitated to let out my audience know why. I haven't done it so far, but I will tonight. Uh, by the way, tonight's guest, speaking of tonight, is Miss Michelle Benson, Mrs. Michelle Benson, Senator, Minnesota Senator, candidate for governor, and I just chatted with her briefly. A well-rounded person in chemistry, public accounting, and all that good stuff. I'll let you know about that later on. But I was saying the reason I often hesitate to share bad news, quote unquote, about myself is that I never ever want pity, and people tend to feel sorry for you and pity you and treat you differently. And I'm just like, I don't want to be treated differently, no matter what happens to me in life. I want people to treat me the same. Uh, but once again, I appreciate the condolences. I got a lot of condolences and sympathy on my sister's passing. I was down in Houston. Once again, the reason I wasn't here last week, we had her memorial services. So I grew up with six just great and wonderful, beautiful sisters, and I'm down to five now, and my heart does hurt. But I was telling someone I was prepared spiritually when I left home at 17, and I'm still prepared spiritually to deal with what life bring my way. Uh, Had a chance to spend some time with my family. I have my mom and dad. I have nine sisters and brothers, so most of us was together in Houston. We reminisce about our challenges and obstacle growing up. It wasn't always easy. As you know about me, I grew up in Natchez, Mississippi, and I'm just very proud of that city. I'm proud of where I grew up. I love the South. I love Southerners. They are misunderstood. I like talking with East Coasters who went to these fancy Ivy League schools, and they think they're sharp and they think they look down on us Southerners. But I don't really pay attention to them and what they talk about. I just had a good time down there reminiscing and enjoying the Southern culture. And like I said, life was challenging, but we all agreed that faith in God, great parents. I know my great grandfather, who was also a businessman. All the adults that raised us. I had mentors, older young men mentoring me. Had great teachers, and I know people think once again Mississippi is backwards, but I think we had a great K through 12 education, and that's proven out by what my classmates are doing and how they've raised families and created wealth, lived a productive life. Most of them are living, quote unquote, the American dream. We had three surgeons that came out of my graduation class down in Mississippi, just this little backward Mississippi, lawyers, accountants, too many engineers to name. Which my best friend Tex McLean ended up being, along with myself and my other best friend Michael Spock Davis. He's a surgeon right now, the Hickenbottom boys. So we had a pretty good time, and we turned out okay. And that's why, and we talked about this a little bit, we get somewhat impatient about the criticism of this country, and how racism is stopping us from doing different things. And I just never bought into that. And I'll just end the distance so I can bring on Michelle. Uh, the scriptures in the Bible, and we'll get into to religion one of these days. And as a preface, all I have to say is that all the great physicists and scientists, Isaac Newton, Albert Einstein, Niels Bohr, Stephen Hawkins, they all believe in God. And if you understand math and the idea of infinity, which you find in a lot of mathematical equations, you'll understand where God is in there whenever you see infinity. So we talked about having a great family. We talked about God. We talked about the education that we had, the faith that we had. We talked about, look, at the bottom line is when you got good God, good people, good food, good music, that is 95% of the joy in life right there. And we were very, very fortunate to have that. So I'm rambling on here. Michelle has been patiently waiting. And so let me bring on our guest tonight, Miss Michelle Benson. Hey, Michelle, welcome to Bright Lights.
Happy to be here.
How you doing tonight? You got a great smile, by the way. I like that. How you doing tonight?
I'm happy, and I was listening to what you were saying about God and science, and nature is order and beauty and logic and reason, and that all science is nature and beauty and logic and reason, and God is nature, beauty, logic, reason. They all fit. And so
yes, they do fit.
Someday you and I are going to have a really robust conversation about
yes,
that.
I'm looking forward to that.
Tonight. Yeah,
I know. Looking forward to that, because I will share this with you before I got in further. I don't get too caught up in losing material things, but I tell people the two material things that I really missed, and I got caught up on it. I had a study Bible that combined the science, just like you said. There's no inconsistency there if you really understand the science, between the science and the idea of a God. And secondly, it was my oldest but goodies collection, which I think was the best ever in the world, of over 1,000 songs. And I hate to admit, I accidentally deleted them on my iPhone, so my heart is hurting on that too. But so, Michelle, let's get into this just a little dialogue and chat that we plan every week. Why don't you tell me? Well, first of all, I think you grew up in Murdock, Minnesota.
Yes. This town that has about 300 people now. I actually grew up south of town on a farm. My brother still farmed there. My sister married a dairy farmer, and they operate their dairy farm nearby. And then went to the College of St. Catherine. And like you mentioned your high school. I had just a really good, solid local school. Mrs. Johnson taught us diagramming. I'm sorry, Mrs. Johnson taught me in second grade spelling and basic literacy, and then Mrs. Larson taught us diagramming sentences in seventh and eighth grade. I'm sure kids nowadays don't diagram sentences, but I found it very helpful in understanding how to structure. And then Mrs. Govig in 10th grade taught us history, helped me to understand how our country was unique in all the world. And warts and all, I think we're still a great place and best place to live on this entire planet. But after I graduated from that very basic, good public school, I went to the College of St. Catherine, got a degree in chemistry. I met my husband while I was going to school there. He was at the Naval Academy, and we got married after he got his commissioning. We spent 5 years moving around the United States. He was with the Navy Nuclear Submarine Corps. And we came back here to start a family, raise our kids, have our, first permanent home, shall we say. We moved a lot with the Navy, close to grandparents and good schools and opportunity. And part of the reason I'm running is I feel like we're missing some of that opportunity and those good basic values that make Minnesota a great place to live.
Well, I talked, and I normally do some background work on my guest, which probably smart. A couple of things, though, before I go. I can't let and I didn't do enough background work on you because I don't know where Murdock, Minnesota is, and
Oh,
normally I don't like having questions unanswered in my mind, and especially today with Google. If they'd had Google when I was growing up,
yes.
I could be a Jeopardy champion now. But where is Murdock,
So you get on
Minnesota?
Highway 12, going straight out of the metro towards the west,
Uh-huh.
and drive 2.5 hours or so, and you'll be in Murdock. So between Wilmer and Benson,
Okay.
if
Okay.
people kind of know where that is.
Okay. Well, I had to get that clear. I was telling you earlier, I looked at you majored in chemistry.
Yeah,
You became a certified public accountant,
yeah.
and now you're in politics. That says to me that not everybody can do that. Let me put it that way. And I have to admit, I took chemistry in college, and uh, I took accounting in college also, and those can be kind of tough subjects. But
And
somehow you combine the two of them, and how does a chemistry major end up being a certified public accountant?
well, curiosity, wanting to understand how things work, that is chemistry. And then understanding how things work, I got my MBA and sat for the CPA exam. If you want to understand how businesses operate, you have to understand the core finance. The numbers explain the business, and then you layer on that the human capacity that is necessary for a business to operate, whether it's the talent within your organization or customers. And so it really is just about continually trying to understand the system that you're working on. And I do that in politics. It's easy to throw things out there and say, well, this is what I do, but you have to understand who it impacts, what the math is, how the system currently works, and how you would change it. So they all kind of use the same skills, but I can't say it was necessarily a straight line.
Well, once again, we'll have a good conversation because that's how I ended up in just about everything I had. I'm just curious of how it worked, and I tell people I just have this thing of relying on other people to explain stuff to me or to teach me something. I can go out and read it up and understand it myself and study myself. So we'll have that conversation too. So you're a CPA, and I think Deloitte Touche.
It's
You were
Deloitte and Touche.
in
Yep.
Touche. Work for
Shorthand
that.
Deloitte now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then somewhere along the line, you got this idea to get involved in politics out in, I think, Anoka, Sherburne, and Isanti counties.
Yeah.
Tell me that thought process, which
Well,
led you to make that questionable move, Michelle.
well, was that again wasn't a straight line. I was working at Deloitte when our oldest son was born, and they're a great company. They let me take good maternity leave, um, but to go back would have meant resuming travel and being away from my son. And so I was a stay-at-home mom for a long time. We had another son, and then I ran for. I got really frustrated with the way things were looking in Washington, D.C. They passed the Affordable Care Act, hadn't read the bill. And I have a lot of respect for our federalist structure. So the federal
Mhm.
government's supposed to do things and the states are supposed to do things. And Minnesota, before the Affordable Care Act, had some of the lowest uninsured rates in the nation. We had affordable individual insurance with lots of choices. We had good safety net programs. And I just didn't think we needed a one size fits all Washington solution here in Minnesota. So instead of yelling at the TV and getting all stressed, I decided to run for office. And sometimes you jump into things without fully being aware of what's at the bottom. But I did win that race, and I've been working on healthcare and complex issues ever since. Minnesota has a lot of good about it, and happy to stand up for what's good about our state, push back on the federal government, and let us be strong. Our country is supposed to be about strong individuals building strong states, and that's what makes our country strong.
Well, I like that. You ran for office in 2010.
Yes,
You won, and as I understand, you've been winning ever since.
yes.
You're running for governor. Before we get to that, What's the status of redistricting here in Minnesota? And I admit, I normally would know the answer to that and keep up with that, but I haven't been keeping up with that. In fact, I listen to the news. I go there listening, kicking and screaming because it's so low quality nowadays. I prefer to go out to other sources. But what's the status of redistricting nowadays, Michelle?
The House and Senate, each caucus in the House and Senate is developing a map. Those proposals will get brought forward in the special session. They'll be voted on. There will be an impasse, shall we say, in Minnesota because Democrats control the House, Republicans control the Senate, and the governor doesn't agree with the Senate's ideas any more than the House does. So there will be no map, and then the courts will decide. And that's when we'll actually get to see. The courts will have to take into consideration the current map and the proposals by the House and the Senate. And I'll tell you, Mark Johnson has been really great about listening to the people of Minnesota on the Senate side. And so I trust that the map he'll bring forward will be a good representation of Minnesota.
And for those people who are interested in this boring subject, when do we expect for a final, well, for the legislature, for the political arm, the legislative branch to finally act before it ends up in the court? What time frame are we dealing with on the
That'll be
redistricting?
as soon as we go back into session. And the first time we went through redistricting, we not the first time I went through redistricting, the process was very similar. And so
Okay.
we're gonna repeat courts drawing the map.
Okay. Now, before we're talking about your candidacy, you used to be head of a health care related committee. Am I
Hey,
you are okay. Okay, yeah.
chair of
I
the
should.
Health and Human Services Committee. So there are some people who call it hell and human suffering because it's just such hard work. But I chose that committee because it impacts the lives of 1 million Minnesotans. It
Mhm.
is very complicated. I had audited hospitals when I was at Deloitte, and so I felt that I could bring something to the table. I could get up to speed quickly. But if we're going to have to make hard decisions, people always want to look to Health and Human Services for ways to cut. And so if we're going to make hard choices, I wanted a seat at the table to make sure that we prioritize who we were going to protect.
Okay. Uh, Briefly, Michelle, because the word "complicated" always catches my attention. What's briefly what's complicated about serving on that committee and the things that you oversee?
So it's the lives of 1 million Minnesotans. It
Hmm.
is everything from licensing medical professionals to licensing hospitals to licensing nursing homes. But when it comes down to the lives of individuals, it's everything from child protection to the sex offender program to basic health care for people who are low income or working poor to regulating the insurance market in Minnesota. So when I say complicated, that's
Mm.
what I
Okay.
mean.
Okay. Uh, you mentioned the kind of insurance part of it, the hospital parts of it. What when you look back over your time on that committee, what do you look back on and see some of the proudest accomplishments in those different areas? Just give me one. We aren't gonna name
Sure.
them all.
And there are actually two
Two. Okay.
that and there have been so many things. You have 1 million people. Everybody's life matters. Um,
Hmm.
and through the pandemic, what our healthcare providers have done, what our
Hmm.
nursing homes and hospitals and group homes have been through. I will never forget the nurse who called me and said, "I've had to do 3 terminal extubations today, and I don't know that I can do this anymore." So that breaks your heart. But then there are moments that absolutely lift you up. And I met a woman who had been sex trafficked from the time she was quite young, so didn't graduate high school. And she had been helped by a particular program. Senator Paul Anderson had the bill, and I was moving it through committee. And She had brought herself back. She was living the path that she was supposed to be on. She had this beautiful 6-year-old daughter, and that daughter was so proud that she was learning her numbers and was so excited. This little girl was so excited to tell me what was going on in her life. And I thought, oh my goodness, this mom went from the hardest place I could ever imagine to raising this beautiful little girl and the resiliency of human beings and the good that can come out of giving people chances and helping them out of trouble. So those were two things that changed me as a person, and I'm grateful.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about your gubernatorial candidacy. And I know just a little bit about politics. I haven't been involved in it that long. But when I think about the race for governor, you have to make inroads in outstate, suburban areas, and the metro area. I mean, if you're planning on winning, do you see any differences in the issues or conversation you have when you're dealing with those different, and I would call them demographics, statewide demographics?
Sure.
What do you see the differences in? Well, and after you talk that, if there are any, what are the commonalities, I guess? Because at the end of the day, I think ultimately we have to acknowledge our differences, but focus on our commonness, our
Right.
commonality,
Right.
to define and work towards solving issues and really helping people's lives, uh, rather than just focusing on votes. So, uh, long question, but what do you see as some of the differences in approaches and strategies of those different
Sure.
demographics, and what do you see as some of the commonalities?
And when you talk about various geographies,
Mhm.
there'll be differences like what's the key economic driver for that area. And so you want to make sure you listen to those folks and that they know that you're going to do your best to understand those key economic drivers. Schools are going to be different throughout the state. When we talk about access to school choice, that's going to be different depending on population density, geography. Um, but let's talk about things that unite us. Everybody wants to be safe. So public safety is something I talk about everywhere I go because people's lives are all impacted when they don't feel safe. And education. Education is a game changer. And access, for example, the school that I went to, there were 44 kids in my graduating class. Now that school needs access to AP classes. So how do we make sure that those kids have access to advanced placement classes or college and school that might be taken for granted in a suburban district? But let's also talk about high standards for everybody. Let's talk about choice so that parents can have their kids in a school that meets that child's needs, partner with teachers in that school. That's going to be true across the state. Parents partnering with teachers for the potential of the full potential of that child makes a difference in that child's life forever. And parents across the state are going to want that. And then opportunity, regardless of what the economic driver of your region is, you want the opportunity to afford a home, get to and from work, succeed at your chosen profession, to help your kids become more prosperous than you were. Those are truths across the state. And so let's talk about the things we share. Um, but let's talk about them in different ways so that people know that where they live and their life experience matters. We're not a one size fits all Minnesota. We saw through the shutdown, we needed different things in different places. We've learned a lot through COVID and through the shutdowns. And frankly, I think public safety, education, and opportunity are the key issues that every Minnesotan wants.
Okay, thank you. Which is a good segue into some of the issues I've seen that you
Sure.
are really care about and have put a priority on it. Accountable government, and I
Yes.
think you had some other adjectives in there that I don't quite recall. But what do you mean about accountable government, and what would Governor Benson do to improve accountability in government?
Well, one of my roles in the legislature was to be on the Legislative Audit Commission, and the Office of the Legislative Auditor finds waste, fraud, and abuse, looks at priorities that the legislature brings forward. And the Department of Human Services went through some really bad years. Rolling out MNsure, which is our state's health exchange, went through some significant problems. And we've learned a lot from that. First of all, we need to expect transparency and accountability at every level. We need people wanting to serve the citizens of Minnesota, not just stay, huddled in their special project and worry about getting more funding, but actually serve the people of Minnesota. And so we can take the lessons learned through my experience with the Legislative Audit Commission, but also my observations of successful programs at the Department of Human Services. I think those are ready to be applied across the board.
Well, uh, you just reminded me of something, Michelle.
Sure.
The whole debacle with, I think it was the Health and Human Services that was overpaid Native
Mm-hmm.
Americans for some type of drug program, and looked like every time I looked up, they were overpaying or mismanaging funds. And I think the last
Mm-hmm.
I remember was we was almost into $100 million or so or more. Did it
Exactly.
was anyone ever held accountable for that? Because as a
No, and
taxpayer, I was steaming
that
about
is
that.
a problem. Um, so Carolyn Ham, who was responsible for the Office of Inspector General, didn't have expertise to do the work that needed to be done to make sure payments were actually matching what they were supposed to. And the people in the particular grants department where that was happening just kept doing the same thing that had always been done and never stopped to say, well, this doesn't actually make sense. And that's part of the individual accountability and transparency that needs to be part of a culture of government. Don't just keep doing things the same way. You need to check to make sure you're following federal law and that you're delivering the services that you're actually required to by law and not just the things that you want.
Well, I'm not going to get into it too much here. Once again, my sources of information and knowledge, I very seldom rely on the news, but I normally have direct knowledge. And I'll just say that I know people out there who know the rules and regulations of receiving funds, and they know how to manipulate them
Uh-huh. Exactly.
to improperly enrich themselves at taxpayers' expense. So I'll leave that there for now. Hey, we also talked a little bit about education. That seems to be one of your passions. It's one of my passions too,
Yes.
because I really believe education and knowledge is the key to the whole thing. I've been most of my life trying to get different cultures to really put a value on education, where we're as willing to spend $200 on tutoring as we are on sneakers. Uh, Tell me, what do you see as the challenges currently in our state in the area of education? And once again, what would Governor Benson do about these challenges?
As you're aware, we have one of the largest opportunity gaps in the entire country. Our
Mhm.
minority student reading scores are in the bottom five. And if you can't read, how are you supposed to learn anything else? If you can't read by the time you're in fourth grade, then how are you going to study science? And you're just off track for graduation. If you don't graduate from high school, we know you're going to either end up, depending on a program in the Department of Human Services or in jail. You just have a much higher propensity for having real struggles in life. So it is immoral to leave children trapped in schools that fail. Okay, these kids have all the potential in the world. And so let's make sure that they can be in a school that challenges their potential. Let's make sure moms and dads partner with teachers. We talked about that earlier. So money following the child is the way we do that, because then parents are empowered and teachers and parents are partners. We cannot disregard the role of teachers in this system, but we need to elevate the role of parents and make it about the kids, not the system.
Yeah. And once again, uh, at the risk of repeating myself too much, I've been on record, and I will stay on record of saying that there's certain areas of the achievement gaps that educators would never ever resolve. I hope I'm wrong, but I've dealt with them, and I know how they look at things and how they prioritize things. I know the infrastructure there. I know the priorities there. Based on what I'm seeing, educating the children is not a number one priority. It's not the number one priority. There's a lot of other things going on there. And then the other thing too, and this is the ultimate challenge to me, is that even with charter schools, I tell people with charter schools, if you think about it, in order for parents to choose to send their children to charter school, they have to be involved in their education. I think
Yeah.
one of the challenges is that we have children whose parents are not involved and almost incapable of being involved in their education, and we need to come up with a way to educate those children. And I agree with you. I think when you got a government monopoly on called public education without competition, I don't
Yeah.
think some. I think I really trust business people to solve issues and problems a little bit better than government. And I think if we open it up and the money follow the child, I think you have some very smart business people that coming up with solution to a lot of these things that the public schools and the teachers union cannot. I've been on record about, as far as Governor Walsh. I call him our educator in chief, kind of tongue in cheek, putting the head of the teachers union in charge of the Department of Education, and
Yeah.
I've been up front.
No.
I think they're a big part of the problem in the achievement gap. And well, I don't think it. I know they are. And to put those head of the teachers union in charge of the Department of Education is really saying
Right.
we're not concerned about solving the achievement gap as far as I'm concerned. So, okay, so we talked about the achievement gap and things like that. There was also some pandemic regulations, if you call it that, or decrees. I'll call it more like a decree and
Executive
edicts.
orders. Yes.
Well, yeah. That affected education. I know my little grandson. I saw the impact of him not going to school. I knew and I do a lot of reading of studies that don't show up on in the news. And I mean, there's so many studies out there with so much critical information that the general public isn't getting. But I knew the low probabilities of him catching or spreading, or knew the mortality rate among school-aged children, and it just seems like we were overdoing things. And I'm being polite here, but what did you think of all these regulations during the pandemic, and some of them still going on, as far as our children education? And somewhere in there, I think the teachers union is involved too. But what was your take on how we handle the pandemic as far as education is concerned, and what would you have done differently?
Well, in March of 2020, I think everybody agreed we didn't know what was going on with the virus and who it was impacting. And so shutting down schools was the right thing then. The problem comes in the fall, August of 2020. There were enough studies to tell us elementary students could be safely back in class. And the teachers union wanted none of it. And so I think parents are more awake than they've ever been. They saw their second graders being given YouTube videos and then questions to answer. That's not education. They saw, a seventh grader being read stories for 30 minutes instead of being told you read the book and then you write a paper. And so the opportunity gap got wider. Our kids got further behind. And when you look at the mental and emotional stress that happened to those kids and their families, moms and dads trying to hold it together who had stable homes. What happens if you're a single mom trying to work a job and now you've got a fourth grader at home trying to do their homework? What does that do to your household? What does that do to the child's education, to the mother's ability to work? I mean, across the board, there wasn't a family with a child in school who wasn't impacted negatively by our elementary schools being shut down. when science said they were safe, and that was demonstrated private schools across the country.
Yeah, I think you mentioned the studies that was out there, and it was out there very early. I mean, it's just incredible what the media isn't informing people of. I mean, you know, I don't want to
And
get on my own soapbox here, but the dysfunctionality
but
of our media and press and journalism is just they're pathetic. I really, if you're like me, you go out and read studies for yourself and you look for information for yourself. It's just incredible what they're not telling people. But you were going to say something, Michelle.
no, but you can look at evidence. So the fact that our kids are further behind was a McKinsey study, not some right-wing group, not COVID deniers. They actually studied what happened to the kids. And then you look at schools across the world that were open and across this country that were open and made the decision that having elementary students in school was important. It was available information at the time, and it damaged families because it wasn't listened to.
Yeah. And part of my keeping on track of this and just learning is that you read information from all over the world in
Amen.
different countries and what they're doing and their approach and the studies they are basing their approach on. And you look at what we're doing and you really, like you say, question a lot of it. My personal type of grievance and interest is that we mentioned already having an achievement gap. And then you put these things in place and it grows wider. And then this is another segue, Michelle. Then we get into this whole critical race theory, which to me, it's not really helping us read, write, and do arithmetic. And what we're really doing is educating people. And I kind of halfway jokingly say this: we're really educating people to grow up to be protesters, to hate this country and protest everything, to be protesters. And we aren't equipping them with skills. What do you think about this whole critical race theory that I think did impact a lot of recent race this year? What's your take on that? And I know that at the state level, we didn't make a decision on it. We
Right.
kicked the ball down the road for a couple of years. As far as I'm concerned, it should have been kicked in the trash bin. But what do you think about this whole critical race theory and its impact on education?
Even if it's not named, if you're teaching children to be divided against each other, then you're destroying their ability to reconcile in the future and to be connected as community. But you've also taken the focus off of what's essential. Can they read? Can they do basic math? Do they understand history? And when I say history, I mean warts and all. But if you're intentionally dividing people, you are undermining their God-given potential and the way that they could connect and build each other up going forward. And so let's focus on what we all need, which is to care about each other, to know how to read, to do basic math, and get ready for moving into the world. School is supposed to be about getting you ready to move into the world, not dividing you against each other.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I have a lot of friends and family members who are hardcore Democrats, I guess, and and I'm saying what I said to them is that I thought, and I'm going to be diplomatic, the police idea was questionable, and probably the most questionable political policy idea I've ever heard. Well, let's not be that political. It's just a dumb idea. And that's what I said to them. And I said, I thought you couldn't come up with any dumber ideas. And somehow you came up with critical race theory teaching that really is not educating our children, but indoctrinating them. And then to top it off, you come up with giving reparations to illegal immigrants. I mean, I'm like, where you guys at? And I saw where James Carville, who's a very influential operative in the political circle, he called it stupid wokeness. And I don't know a better way of putting it. And I hope we get away from that. I hope a message was sent because I'm concerned about the people in my community. And
Mhm.
as far as I'm concerned, it's business development, economic development, companies bringing companies into the community to employ people, give them high paying job, where the members in the community can be part of the governance board and management, where they can help set aside money to send the members of the community to colleges and
Yeah.
post-secondary school. I think the education is a key component. I think we need the children in these communities, when they graduate from high school, they read at high school level.
Yeah,
Anything short of that,
they need to graduate.
yeah,
I mean, we need
yeah,
to,
yeah,
okay,
yeah,
graduation becomes a priority.
right,
And to graduate, you need to know how to read and do basic math. And when you talk about businesses coming into your community, if they, if people who invest in businesses or want to grow a business think a community is unsafe, they're not going to move there.
right,
So defunding the police was a radical idea. Thank God the people of Minneapolis rejected it. Okay, if you want to call 911, there better be somebody else on the other end who can help you get out of whatever problem you've got. If you think about what law enforcement does and what first responders do, just be grateful. Yes, you need to reform some police officers who've gotten off track, but fundamentally, we need safe communities. And then those businesses are going to be looking for an educated workforce. They're going to be looking for a workforce that knows how to read, knows how to do basic math, and and has the skills to help their business grow. And then they'll move in. It's all about partnership, safe community, educated population, and then people investing and growing. That's how you change a neighborhood.
hmm And well, the other thing I say to people in the business, I want people from the community to start and own these businesses, and that's
Amen.
where you create generational wealth and put money in people's pockets and help people go out to eat with their families, send their children to school, not to be sweating about affording mortgage or rent and those type of things. I think we need
Yeah.
to be focusing on, and rather
Buying,
than all these questionable
yeah.
type of activities and policies.
Owning their home instead of being subject to the rental market. Think about what happens when you have a stable job and you can own your home and your kids are getting educated. Your life looks very different
Right.
than when your community doesn't have employment opportunities, when you can't find a house that you can afford. I don't mean an apartment, I mean a home. Home ownership matters. And when you don't trust your kids' school to educate them, your life is very different.
Oh, I agree. And my wife and I, we put our money where our mouth is. So we do invest in inner city for profit businesses, and you take a risk there. But what I told one of these entrepreneurs, and he's a very talented little guy. Uh, I shouldn't call him a little guy. He's a talented young man. I'm more interested in financial justice than social justice. I leave that to other people to work the social justice in, but I'm trying to get some financial justice and put money in people's pockets. So, okay, so we talked about education achievement gap, pandemic regulation. We talked about choice. Let's go to another
Sure.
subject area that's really impacting this state. And by the way, uh, I've been around here long enough to know that Minnesota is trending towards negative things, the worst. And I'm of the belief that one single party monopoly on power and government is behind a lot of it. I think we should be looking at more diversity in our government. But what uh, I've been reading about the average yearly income of people moving out of Minnesota being over 200,000. Those moving in is roughly $37,000 a year. And once again, you don't have to be a genius to figure out those numbers are not good for the long run interests of the state. In fact, of all the statistics that I've heard, even given the deficit, and I'm a numbers guy, that's the
Yeah.
one number that really stood out for me on me, and I'm like, boy, this state is headed down the wrong path. The city is headed down the wrong path. What do you think about those numbers, and what can we do about them, Michelle?
Well, first of all, we have higher taxes than Massachusetts. We're right up there with New Jersey. And so we're literally chasing talent out of this state because of our tax rate.
Hmm.
And so let's make our state competitive again. We're going to have to bring down tax rates. There are a number of states that are actually moving to a zero income tax
Hmm.
because they want to remain competitive. And there are neighboring states. So this
Hmm.
isn't far fetched. So can we get out of the top 10? Because being in the top 10 of taxes is not like being in the top 10 for football or, God forbid, reading scores. Wouldn't it be great to be in the top 10 of reading scores? We're in the top 5 for taxes and in the bottom 5 for minority reading scores. So you know what? Our reading scores aren't a money issue, they're a standards
Hmm.
issue.
Hmm.
And our GDP, so our economic growth in 2019, was in the bottom half. Usually Minnesota is an economic leader. So we're going to need to change our tax environment, our regulatory environment, and grow that talented workforce, make sure our people are safe, because that's how we grow an economy.
Right. Well, once again, I don't want to make it about me personally, but I want Michelle, if you're governor, to know that for the first time in my years here in Minnesota, I'm seriously thinking about moving out of this state. I probably will. I'm seriously, I don't like what's going on, the trend in the city here. It's just crazy, and violence and everything else, and you got crazy people in charge. And then, when you reach retirement age, the taxes thing, there's a lot of states don't tax retirement money and
No, they don't.
accounts and things like that. And so, even though it hurts me, I probably will be moving out of Minnesota. But if someone gets in there and change some of these policies, it's not too late to convince me to stay here, me and my family.
Well, okay.
Go ahead.
And so,
Hmm.
Lacey,
Hmm.
what happens to your grandkids when you leave the state?
Well,
I'm not trying to guilt
no, no,
you
no, 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 no. That's a good
at
question.
all.
That's because, and my wife and I talk about this and kind of laugh about it. I mean, we watch these CSI stories and things like that.
Mhm.
There are actually grandparents who do some crazy things so they don't grandkids don't move too far from them. So that's a very good point,
Yeah.
because those people who know me, who knows my little grandson, he's the joy and heart of my life, and so that's a good point. So I might have to bribe his parents, my son and everybody, to move down with us some kind of way. But that's a very good point. Or I'll save enough money to fly back at least once a
But
month or every weekend. I'll just fly
so,
back and see him. Go ahead. Uh-huh.
so Craig and I came back here to raise our kids so we could be close to grandparents. Now they're still quite a ways from the cities, but when you tax Social Security, when you tax retirement, when you tax success that people have, as they get older towards their retirement years, you compel them to move out of the state.
Yeah. Yes, you do.
And then you don't show up as great as it is to fly back and visit your grandkids or fly them down so they can spend Christmas through New Year's with you. You're not at their baseball game. You're not
No.
sitting next to them in church. You don't show up at the school pageant and cheerlead them when they get the solo in the third grade pageant. And so there is a quality of life issue when we start chasing people out of this state with tax rates.
So you told me I got to consider moving the whole family, grandkids, and all with me. So that's the
Okay,
way
let's
I'm
fix
looking at
this so that
it.
Lacey doesn't have to move. Okay,
Yeah.
I understand people who want to move because of the weather. They shouldn't be chased out because of
Right,
our
right.
tax environment.
And just quickly back to this whole police reform, defunding the police. You know what amazed me? First of all, that it got on the ballot in the first place. I mean, that's one of the reasons I'm thinking about moving out. Something like that even got on the ballot in the first place. And then secondly, uh, I just found out it only won by 12%. An
Yeah,
idea like that gets on the ballot and loses by only 12%. And that tells me the trend of the city and the people living in the city they're scaring me with some of this stuff. And keep in mind that I live in North Minneapolis, where I see what that's doing to our standard of living. And we got people like that in charge. And voters keep voting them in for whatever reason, I can't figure it out. What kind of logic and stuff they got in there? Okay, good. I'm gonna get off of that soapbox. So I've seen some ideas of yours on energy
Yeah.
and policies in the energy area. Why don't you let our audience know how you feel about that particular issue and what are you planning on doing about it to make it better?
The cost of energy impacts every single family and every business. It is just like taxes. Okay. You have to have electricity and you have to heat your home. Businesses have to have electricity to run their machines, fuel to run their machines. So we should have an all of the above approach because we do need to think about the environmental impact of energy policy. I have a little mnemonic device. So we need reliable energy. That means when you turn on the switch, you have power generated. Windmills and solar panels are not necessarily reliable, but they can be part of the mix. A resilient grid, so we don't have what happened in Texas have up here. Okay?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Reasonably priced. Again, your family budget should matter and it should be balanced with environmental impact. And the last is respectful of the environment. So let's look at nuclear power. It is zero carbon. It is very reliable. My husband was on a Navy nuclear submarine. There are people who figured out how to do small nuclear safely. And no, we're not going to use naval reactors here in Minnesota, but it is possible for us to have small reactors properly located throughout the state. So we have zero carbon, which helps the environment, global warming. It can be very reliable because nuclear power plants run at 80% all the time. They don't come on and off like wind and solar. Resilient, we can have multiple sites, and then respectful of the environment. It can be all part of that mix. We can get large hydro, which is a reliable renewable resource out of Manitoba. We can include that in our mix. And then we can be open to innovation for how we store energy generated by wind and solar so that they can become part of a stable mix on our electric grid.
Well, that's a very thoughtful answer, actually, because it's taken into consideration the various trade-offs you have to make. And a lot of times people don't take into consideration there's no perfect answer to any of these things. And it's all about trade-offs. And and by the way, when I started really looking at issues, the two ones I really wanted to research was climate change and lack of housing. And the housing is a kind of a complex kind of a issues. Both of them are. Climate change is also, but once again, well, I started with climate change, and I'm a simple-minded country boy, and I'm proud of it. But I'm like, I kept hearing that 97% of the world scientists support climate change, and then blah 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 blah. And I was just like, wait a minute, if 97% of the scientists agree with it, why every time I hear the subject being discussed, it's politicians and celebrities? Where are the scientists that they're hiding from? Where are all these scientists? To me, that's just common sense.
Science isn't a popularity contest. So global temperatures probably are increasing. Can we directly correlate carbon to that? Probably not to a scientific certainty, but there are people concerned enough that they are willing to make different energy choices. We should make sure that those energy choices are available in the market so that people who are concerned have the opportunity to purchase net zero carbon energy.
Yeah. And I agree so much with that. And as you do the studies and listen to other people, once again, stuff you don't hear on our media, who talks about the trade-offs and the challenges and everything, and some of the ideas that they have will reduce it, maybe cost $3 trillion and then reduce it 1%, and the approach that we have on that developing nation, even like China and India have, that they're contributing to it. When you start looking at all that, and then you learn that this 97% when you start looking at the details behind something, it's a rig. It's a
Right.
rig number too. And
And
so go
and
ahead.
we should not let China dictate our energy policy. We shouldn't let anyone else in the world dictate the energy policy of the United States of America, because China will work with their allies to make sure that the United States has slowed economic growth. Part of that is controlling our supply of energy, while at the same time they're building coal plants hand over fist. It's the same with mining. They are not safely mining. We can do that in Minnesota. They have terrible work conditions. We have good work conditions here in Minnesota. So let's not let China drag us around by the nose and tell us what our policies should be. Let's have policies that are good for Minnesota and good for the United States.
And we talked earlier about, I forgot which particular issue, what we have in common. I think that's the common thing. If we ever going to get to tackling some of these very complex and tough issues, we have to think of it, what we have in common. And, I tell everybody the common thing we have, we're all on this planet together. We all have children and grandchildren that we love and want to leave behind a clean environment. And even things like we all eat fish from the lakes and the oceans and things. So let's assume that everybody has an interest in solving this issue. And even though they got all kinds of different ideas, why can't we get together and solve this with the understanding that we all have the same incentive to leave this planet better than we found it? And of course, from a spiritual kind of, religious kind of perspective, God did put us in as caretakers of this, and we should take it very seriously. Okay, so energy, we talked about that. Another item that I saw, which I was surprised because not too many politicians I find are talking about this nowadays, is the whole issue of data privacy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Tell us what you see as a issue to address in the area of data privacy, and how would Governor Michelle go about doing something about it?
Well, first of all, there's a huge education opportunity. Now that big tech has decided to collect information on all of us, I think people are keenly aware that their data is everywhere. So when it comes to government data should be public unless there's a duly passed law that makes it non-public or private. Your personal information that the government collects should be private, again, unless there's a law that the public has been made aware of. And that private data needs to be collected. So that's cybersecurity, that is training of individuals to respect your private data. And then corporate protections. For example, your health records shouldn't be able to be shared with Google. Full stop. Minnesota's health records law keeps your data from being shared with Google. The federal health records law allows it to be shared with Google Health Analytics without your knowledge or consent. So when it comes to your data, it is yours, and it should only be shared with your informed consent. And as we move into the age of AI, as we move into big data, it's going to be really important for the people of this state to stand up for their privacy rights and for government to protect those rights.
Those all very good points, especially as you mentioned big tech, because those of us who remember, at least our eighth grade civics, I started off with the idea, well, it's different if private companies got it versus the government. And people understand, who understand civics know exactly what I'm talking about. But then you find out there's this secret arrangement between big tech and government that any information they got, the government also have too. But, at the end of the day, there used to be let the buyer beware type of attitude. And what amazes me is that the number of citizens who either don't know that you're on social media and you're doing Google searches, they're capturing everything they know about you. They know everything you do, where you go, and they're selling it to all kinds of people, and they're giving it to the government. And basically, you are giving up your privacy for the right to a free social media app. And I don't think people have really thought about that. I was telling someone, because of what I do, my job and
Yeah.
everything, I
Yeah.
almost have to be on social media now. But I'm looking forward to the day that I'm not on social media, and I don't even have a cell phone. I'm looking forward to that day, because just the whole business model of Facebook, Twitter, Google, I just have a serious
Mhm.
problem and issue with it. And especially when we find out big tech is not impartial and they're
And
censoring people and things like that. I just have a serious problem. Yes, Michelle.
they're also building a digital profile of your kids. And
Yes.
so is your school district putting your child on an app, and is your child's data being shared, and do you have informed consent? So these are the kinds of questions we need to ask of all government systems, because under the authority of the government, if you're collecting data, it should be private unless it is given by informed consent to a fully disclosed entity. So there's a lot of work to do on
Right.
this, but it has been a passion of mine since I got to the legislature, because there's nothing more personal than your information.
Yeah. And we're going to start wrapping it up pretty soon. But as the host, I have certain liberties. Uh, so I tell everyone, I remember when I was growing up, and that's the nice thing, I guess, about growing old and stuff, is that we used to have information about concerns about communism and the fact that the government know everything about you and they track you and everything, and all those things that they scared the heck out of us about communism when we were growing up has
Yeah.
come true here in this country. I mean, it's incredible. And I know a lot of young people out there who are not old enough and been around to go through all this and know about all this. They don't see anything wrong. But people like me who remember everything that they had bad to say about communism, I'm seeing it right here in America today. And so that's why I'm concerned, and that's why I'm involved, because like you, I'm concerned about the future of this country, and I'm looking for what type of country we're going to leave our grandchildren. So, Michelle, one more issues area, and
Sure.
then we'll start wrapping it up and let you tell me some things this host was not prescient, I think that's a word, enough to bring up. But let's talk about the whole issue of health care, which
Sure.
I think is challenging. And I think fundamentally, and I don't know whether we can put that genie back in this bottle here. We don't want government run healthcare. We don't want that. But right now, we have basically a lot of people just depending on their jobs for healthcare,
Right.
and we understand the history of it and how it got into place. But all I know, and I'm just being honest, and there used to be a time when healthcare was free. You had great healthcare and it was very cheap. Your employers offered it, and deductibles and co-payments was low. Now that's all changing, high deductibles and things like that. And when it was like that, and even to a certain extent now, I hardly ever looked at them at my hospital bill, my medical bills and stuff, because it was paid for. And somehow, and I think you mentioned that we have to have individuals have more of a stake in the cost of healthcare. Seems like to me that's the start. We need to understand the relationship between big pharma and the medical community. We perhaps need to reevaluate our whole approach to healthcare, where you do whatever you want, eat whatever you want, get sick, and we got a pill for it, and you could be on this pill for the rest of your life. That's just my input, Michelle. Didn't mean to set you up for anything or influence your answer, but what do you see as the big issues in healthcare, and how do we go about solving them?
Well, obviously, cost and access are very big issues. You talk about being tied to an employer plan. We could do an hour just on the healthcare market. So I'm going to focus on what we've learned coming out of COVID. Okay, COVID was an historic event. We're coming out of this pandemic. We got really good at telehealth in some areas, including mental health,
Mhm.
chemical dependency, access to specialists. So think about what happens when you have improved access with probably lower costs. but demand good as or better outcomes than an in-person visit. So if you live in a deep rural county and you can be at home and get feedback on a lab test that you had instead of having to drive to the office, make a care plan. I think that is a game changer for a lot of parts of this state and not just deep rural, because we have some places in the inner city where people don't have adequate access to transportation, but they could be on their phone doing an audiovisual call for a check-in for mental health issues. Um, so people who have chronic depression, anxiety, have hard time getting out of the house. What if we can improve their access by using this technology that we really expanded during COVID? So I think that's some good news coming out of COVID, good news for healthcare. Another bit of good news coming out of COVID, I think we've all become much more aware of our individual responsibility for our health. Now, that doesn't mean you do your own appendectomy, but you take good care of your body, and that helps you mitigate disease, whether it is contracting COVID or heart disease or cancer. The better you take care of yourself, the stronger your body is to fight if you have a medical complication. And so I hope that's a second good thing that comes out of this pandemic.
Okay. Well, knowing that you're on the committee that deals with these issues in the Minnesota Senate, uh, perhaps we'll circle back around and just have a
Sure.
conversation on healthcare, because there's so many little things. And once again, in addressing issues within the inner city community, when I tell people there's a lot of dots you need to understand and connect to solve these issues. You miss any of those dots, it's going to be very challenging. And I'll just tell you, one of my pet peeve, and we might not want to do anything, is just portion size. That's one of my pet peeves. Is that uh,
Yeah, for me, I don't think it's the governor's place to tell you what size
I agree.
portion you have.
I agree.
But you can share,
Yeah.
bring a
Oh, yeah,
friend.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And, and that's a good point. And I was always going to point out, once again, going back to our eighth grade civics, or my eighth grade civics, I don't know what other people took there. And it said, I'm just a big believer in the idea of a small federal government, limited government and stuff. And
Amen.
I don't want to get involved in anything. I think we need to get rid of a lot of the cabinets and all this and involvement in state issues that the framers of the Constitution imagined to push down the state level. And whether you're talking government or management, when I was in corporate management, especially when we're having all kinds of issues out there, one of the goals was to push decision making down in the organization. And that's what we need to do at a government level too. I want to run into the guy who raised my taxes. I want to run into him at the gas station or the grocery store. And
Yeah.
I think that's the idea that we had in mind, framers had in mind. They didn't have in mind someone being a senator for 50 years and dying in office after being, I mean, all this kind of stuff and the influence of lobbyists and things like that. But that's a whole nother conversation for our next interview. Uh, right now, I give all of my guests, like I said, a chance to bring up any area that I probably should have brought up as a host. Once I'm cooking and really good at this, I won't be missing any of these areas, but every once
Okay.
in a while I do. So bring up a area, Michelle, if there's any that you wanted to address that I was not prescient. I think that's enough to bring up and talk.
I think you talked about some really key issues. But as we look at the next year's election, let's look at where Minnesota goes from here. So we have mining, we have forestry, we have great ag land, we have really talented people. And you see the entrepreneurial drive. I listen to you and the stories about the people that you're investing in your community. And so going forward, how do we make Minnesota strong? How do we make us safe? How do we make us the best state we can possibly be? I think it's empowering individuals, making sure they're safe and educated, and they see a future here, not moving their whole family to Texas, Lacey. I want your family to be here because it is a safe and good place to raise a family and grow a business, and that's my mission. Let's talk about where Minnesota goes from here.
Okay, well, I'm going to look forward to the leadership of the city, the state, this county to do some things to make me change my mind. And hopefully we can get that done. So, once again, thanks, Michelle, for being our guest tonight. We really appreciated it. Keep up the smiles and go out there and work hard. And good luck on your campaign. So thank you very much. And say, maybe one of these days get to meet your husband, a naval guy. I got some letters from the Naval Academy, all the military academies to go there, and I kind of regret I
Wow.
didn't. I'll tell him about
Wow.
my story where I was in ROTC at the University of Minnesota for 3 days, but that's for another time.
Oh, and I tell you, he does recruiting for the Naval Academy. He's a blue and gold officer, and there's there is nothing like the process of going through that and recruiting people out of places like Minneapolis and St. Paul. There is so much potential there, and so if you have a kid who's really willing to push themselves, it doesn't matter where they live, they should look into one of those service academies. And someday, Lacey, we'll get together and we'll talk about that.
Yeah. Okay. So to my audience, thanks for tuning in tonight. Thanks, Michelle. If the audience want to support this podcast, go out to LaceyJohnson.com. And Michelle, I will be talking to you soon. And I dedicated this program to my late sister, Bridget Johnson, and let her know that I will always love her and miss her. So thanks, everyone. Thanks, Michelle. We'll talk soon.
Thank you.
All
Good
right.
evening.
Bye-bye.